Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a world where medicine felt more like a half-remembered dream than a science textbook. Imagine lying on a stone bench 2,000 years ago, a faint oil lamp flickering in the corner, and the faint scent of herbs smoldering on a brazier. You're not in a hospital ward, you're in a temple courtyard, waiting for the gods themselves to whisper your cure. Strange fevers, unsettling rashes, pounding headaches that felt like someone dropping amphory on your skull. These were the puzzles of Greek healers, and the answers were often, let's say, experimental. And trust me, if you were offered some of the remedies I've read about, like swallowing ground minerals, or rubbing fermented goat fat onto your chest, you probably wouldn't last a day. You'd tap out faster than someone trying kale chips for the first time in their 40s. You just wouldn't survive, and that's okay, because you're not supposed to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Leave it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You picture yourself padding softly across the worn marble floor of an Asclepian, a healing sanctuary dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. The night air is thick with incense smoke, curling like spectral fingers toward the ceiling. You hear distant murmurs of other pilgrims who, like you, have carried their illnesses across mountains and plains, convinced that divine power, not human skill, holds the key to relief. The priests assure you that the cure will come in sleep, that Asclepius will step into your dreams and prescribe the treatment you need. Some whisper he might even appear as a snake slithering across your blankets, a sacred sign of his touch. And yes, if a reptile crawled over you in the middle of the night today, you'd probably bolt straight to the ER. But back then? That was just the copay. You hear the soft creak of wooden doors shutting. The temple grows quieter, and the only sounds are your breathing and the faint rustle of robes as attendants move about. You settle down, not exactly on a mattress but on a slab softened with straw. A flickering lamp throws giant shadows of snake carvings on the wall, and the oil sputters like a heartbeat. Your eyelids grow heavy, though the mixture of fear and anticipation keeps you balanced between waking and dreaming. The Greeks believed that illness wasn't just a biological malfunction, it was often the gods marking their displeasure. That rash on your arm? Maybe Apollo was annoyed you skipped a festival. That stabbing pain in your stomach? Possibly the result of offending Demeter by wasting bread. To us, it might sound like blaming Wi-Fi problems on Mercury being in retrograde, but for them, the logic was airtight. And why not? If thunder came from Zeus and the sea boiled from Poseidon's anger, then surely your aching joints must come from someone up there taking notes on your behavior. As you drift closer to sleep, you imagine the god himself approaching. Sometimes, patients claim to wake with clear instructions: apply olive oil mixed with honey, recite a hymn, or even perform a sacrifice of a rooster. Other times, they awoke confused, with bizarre images lodged in their mind, like a vision of themselves drinking seawater or standing in a field of poppies. Interpreting these dreams was the priest's specialty, a job part doctor, part therapist, and part improv actor. Some historians still debate whether these dream cures were a form of early psychological therapy, placebo effect, or just theater dressed up as divinity. You roll onto your side, the straw poking your shoulder, and picture an ancient patient nearby coughing softly into the night. The smell of herbs grows stronger, mingling with the faint mustiness of old stone. Somewhere, a snake's scales scrape faintly against marble. Your pulse quickens, not from fear, but from the sense that you are participating in something halfway between science and ritual, between medicine and magic. And even though you know that tomorrow's cure might involve drinking wine mixed with seawater or rubbing garlic across your eyelids, you can't help but feel a flicker of hope. After all, isn't half of healing simply believing you can get better? The night deepens, the lamps dim, and you finally surrender to the strangeness of it all. Tonight, healing belongs not to reason or anatomy books but to gods who slip through dreams like whispers. And while your modern mind may chuckle at it, lying there on that hard stone, you realize something uncomfortable. Even in your time, people still believe in cures that sound just as strange. Energy bracelets, detox teas, juice cleanses. Maybe humanity never quite lost that hunger for magical answers. You shift on that rough bed of straw, and the night air presses closer, heavy with the perfume of burning resin and herbs you can't quite name. The temple of Asclepius isn't silent. It hums faintly with the sound of soft chanting from priests in the colonnade, their words weaving through the dark like an endless lullaby. The air smells of thyme and frankincense, and every inhalation feels both calming and a little overwhelming, as if someone lit a candle in a spice cabinet. In this dim world, you learn quickly that healing isn't confined to tonics or poultices. The priests insist, the god speaks in dreams. You're not meant to rely on their medicine alone. You're here to sleep in the sacred hall, the abaton, and hope that divine revelation strolls casually through your unconscious mind. Picture a waiting room where instead of flipping through outdated magazines, you lie down with the expectation that your dreams will spit out a medical prescription. It's like falling asleep hoping Netflix will automatically pick the perfect show for you, and waking up to find it's a detailed, God-approved treatment plan. The rituals before sleep are a performance in themselves. A procession of the sick limps toward the sanctuary, each carrying a small offering, cakes, coins, sometimes a little clay figurine of the afflicted body part. You notice the shelves filling with these tokens, tiny legs, eyes, even clay stomachs lined up like some strange anatomical toy shop. They are not decorations, they're proof of devotion, each one pleading silently for divine repair. You might chuckle, imagining what a modern pharmacy would look like if every customer left a miniature version of their headache or sore knee behind the counter. Once inside, the attendants sprinkle you with water drawn from a sacred spring, cool droplets sliding down your arms. The sensation makes you shiver, a sharp wake-up before surrendering to sleep. You're guided across the marble floor, bare feet slapping against stone worn smooth by generations of pilgrims. Torches crackle against the walls, and you feel both watched and comforted by painted eyes of gods staring from the frescoes. And then there's the snakes. Not metaphorical ones, the real kind. Sacred serpents glide freely across the temple grounds, slithering in and out of shadows with unnerving grace. To modern eyes, it's the stuff of nightmares. You try to sleep, and suddenly there's a smooth, cool body curling near your ankle. But to the Greeks, this was Asclepius himself, present and healing. If one brushed against you while you dreamed, you'd wake convinced that you'd been marked for recovery. Imagine explaining that to your therapist today. No, I'm fine. A snake cured me while I was napping. The sleep itself isn't ordinary. Priests encourage you to chant hymns beforehand, to repeat the god's name, to focus your mind so your dreams stay on message. You're asked to lie in silence, to wait for visions. Some people report clear answers. Drink a mixture of honey and vinegar for your cough, or walk 3 times around the sanctuary for your aching joints. Others wake with riddles, dreams of being licked by dogs, or walking across a burning field. The priests take these like crossword clues, interpreting them with a straight face. To them, everything holds meaning. You can't help but admire their confidence, part doctor, part priest, part dream analyst. You'd half expect one to hand you a bill that reads, "Services rendered, divine interpretation, 5 drachma." Historians still puzzle over these accounts. Were they elaborate placebo effects, carefully crafted to calm the mind enough for the body to heal itself? Were the priests early psychologists, planting ideas and offering symbolic reassurances? Or were they simply gifted storytellers, skilled in turning confusion into confidence? Scholars debated endlessly, their arguments echoing like those chants in the temple hall. And in the middle of this ritual theater, you feel something strange. You feel seen. For all the incense and marble, the real healing might lie in the sheer attention paid to you. Unlike a rushed doctor's visit in modern life, here your pain is treated with gravity, folded into a sacred narrative. Whether or not the gods actually intervene, the ritual itself soothes you. The anxiety of illness softens under candlelight and whispered hymns. You almost forget the coughing pilgrim on the mat beside you, the smell of sweat mixed with herbs, the shifting shadow of a serpent sliding across the stone. It's easy to dismiss these temples as superstitious playgrounds, but think about it, even now, people flock to spas, meditation retreats, and wellness centers that promise restoration through atmosphere as much as medicine. The Greek ascopin isn't as foreign as it first seems. Maybe you'd still roll your eyes at the idea of a snake brushing your cheek as divine therapy. But when you close your eyes and drift into that heavy temple air, you realize something modern medicine sometimes forgets. The ritual of being cared for matters as much as the cure itself. And as you start to fade into sleep, you hear the priest chanting slow, the torches crackle lower, and the serpents curl into hidden corners. The abaton grows cooler, quieter, softer. The air itself seems to murmur that help is coming, not from tablets or syringes, but from the vast, unpredictable language of dreams. The air inside that sacred hall feels heavier tonight, as if the walls themselves are listening. You've already been told that sleep will bring guidance, but here's the twist. The guidance isn't always gentle. In the Greek world, illness wasn't just a random misfortune. It was often read as a divine punishment, a direct message from the gods that you had stepped out of line. That fever in your bones? Maybe Apollo was irritated you didn't sing loud enough during his festival. The stabbing ache in your gut? Perhaps Demeter thought you were wasting bread. You could almost laugh at it, like getting a parking ticket from Zeus. But lying here, in the glow of torchlight, surrounded by coughing pilgrims, you sensed the fear was very real. Priests knew this, of course. That's why the rituals weren't only about herbs and ointments. They were about atonement. You watch as a man near you shuffles forward, his face pale with sickness. He bows low before a priest, whispering some sin he believes caused his suffering. Maybe he slighted a neighbor, maybe he cheated in the marketplace. The priest nods gravely, sprinkles him with water, and instructs him to sacrifice a rooster. You almost snort at the thought, a celestial timeout enforced by poultry. But the man clutches the bird like it's the ticket to healing. The rituals themselves could be bizarre. Some required chanting hymns backwards to confuse the evil spirits. Others demanded the sick person smear themselves with clay and sit in the sun until it baked hard, like they were turning into a human statue. There are records of patients swallowing bitter concoctions of wine mixed with ash, not because the ingredients had any known medical value, but because suffering through the taste was seen as proof of repentance. You can practically imagine a priest saying, "Yes, it's awful, so the gods will know you mean it." Sometimes illness was linked to entire communities. A plague sweeping through a city wasn't just a health crisis, it was seen as collective guilt. Priests would lead parades of penitence, entire towns processing through the streets, carrying statues of gods, begging forgiveness. Offerings piled up on altars, the air thick with the smell of burnt animal fat. If you were sick during such a time, you weren't just a patient, you were a symbol, a reminder that the gods were watching closely. And the irony is, the rituals probably worked in ways nobody admitted. A public confession, a symbolic act, a strange-tasting potion, all of these could ease the anxiety that gnawed at the sick. And when fear calmed, the body sometimes followed. Modern psychology has a neat term for it, placebo. But in the marble glow of the temple, it was simply divine mercy. Historians still debate how much of this was manipulation, how much was sincere belief, and how much was accidental early therapy. The argument lingers like smoke from a long-dead torch. You roll your shoulders, trying to imagine what it would feel like to believe that your rash wasn't caused by an infection, but by insulting Athena. A scary thought, because it means healing doesn't just depend on herbs. It depends on apologizing correctly. Miss a step, and the fever stays. It's like calling tech support and realizing the gods put you on hold until you fix your attitude. The priests reinforced this mindset with carefully staged moments. If someone began to recover after a ritual, the story was retold again and again. The gods have lifted their curse, they would say, pointing to the grateful patient. If the person worsened, the explanation was simple: not enough devotion, or worse, sins still hidden. Either way, the narrative stayed intact. You can almost admire the system. It's as airtight as any modern customer service policy. And here's the thing, as strange as it sounds, you're not entirely immune to it yourself. Even now, people talk about bad vibes, making them sick, or insist on lucky charms to ward off illness. You hear friends half-jokingly say the universe punishes them for skipping workouts. The Greek world simply made it official, carving those fears into rituals, burning them into incense smoke. Somewhere in the temple, a rooster crows, sacrificed to plead with unseen powers. The sound echoes faintly through the abaton, blending with the sighs of restless sleepers. You breathe in the mingled scents of straw, sweat, and smoke, and you wonder, was this healing, or theater? Maybe it was both. Maybe it didn't matter. Because as your eyes droop, you realize the one thing stronger than illness is the hope that someone, anyone, mortal or divine, cares enough to lift it. The night stretches on, and you notice the shifting bodies around you, some whispering in their sleep, others muttering as fevers gnaw at their strength. Of all the ailments scribbled into Greek medical texts, fevers appear again and again, stubborn, mysterious, and terrifying. Imagine lying there with your skin burning, sweat soaking into straw, while no one quite knows what is happening inside your body. To the ancient mind, fever was its own kind of creature, not a symptom but a spirit that had crept inside you, clutching your insides and rattling your bones. Greek physicians wrote about these strange fires that came and went in cycles. Some lasted a day, others lingered for weeks. There were tertian fevers that seemed to spike every third day, and quartan ones that arrived every fourth, like clockwork. To you, it sounds suspiciously like malaria, but without microscopes or blood tests, the Greeks simply described what they saw: patients shivering, teeth chattering one moment, sweating rivers the next. They catalogued it carefully, like meteorologists charting storms, even if they didn't understand the winds that drove them. And the cures? Let's just say you need a strong stomach. One popular remedy: dilute wine mixed with seawater. You can picture the patient grimacing, cup to lips, swallowing something that tastes like a failed beach picnic. Physicians praise the salt for balancing humors, the wine for warming the spirit. You, on the other hand, would probably spit it back out and demand a refund. But the Greeks swore by it, believing the mixture forced the fever's heat to burn itself out. It was medicine by way of punishment. You felt worse before you felt better, which probably convinced people it was working. Others swore by bathing in cold water to shock the body back into balance, though this came with its risks. Imagine being feverish, trembling, and then dunking yourself in a chilly spring while priests mutter encouragement. Some patients staggered back out of the water renewed, others collapsed right there. It's the ancient equivalent of telling someone with the flu to run a marathon to sweat it out. And then there were charms, bronze amulets etched with words of power, worn around the neck to cool the blood. People tied sprigs of laurel above their beds, believing Apollo's sacred tree would scare off the fever spirit. Some burned aromatic herbs, filling rooms with smoke so thick it must have driven not only fevers but also neighbors away. One old text even suggests pressing a live pigeon against the patient's forehead, claiming the bird would draw out the heat. You can imagine the poor animal flapping wildly, probably more distressed than the patient. The priests, of course, leaned into divine explanations. If your fever rose after offending a god, then the only cure was appeasement. Sacrifice a goat, sing hymns, fast for 3 days, and maybe, just maybe, the fire inside you would subside. For the common pilgrim, it wasn't about whether the cure made sense. It was about hope, and the sense that someone, somewhere, had an answer. And here's the unsettling truth: some of these remedies probably did help, if only by accident. Salt water can rehydrate a dehydrated body. Wine has antiseptic properties. Cold baths can lower body temperature. The pigeon, though, well, let's just say historians still scratch their heads about that one. Scholars debate whether such treatments were superstition with occasional lucky breaks, or whether they preserved kernels of practical knowledge buried under ritual. You shift on your straw mat, imagining the sweat beading on your forehead, the weakness in your limbs. Someone nearby groans softly, their breath shallow. You wonder how much of healing is science, and how much is simply being cared for, surrounded by others who also believe. The fevered patient who drinks seawater might recover not because of the salt, but because the act of doing something, anything, kept despair at bay. The temple grows quieter, torches burning low. The fever, though, doesn't sleep. It lingers in the bodies around you, unseen but palpable, the air thick with its presence. And as you listen to the rasping breaths of the sick, you can't help but think of your own times under blankets, waiting for heat and chills to pass, clutching water bottles like lifelines. Illness, it seems, makes all humans, ancient or modern, feel equally small. The night air turns cooler, and yet, somewhere close by, you hear the unmistakable sound of someone's teeth clattering, not from cold, but from something deeper. The Greeks had a word for these episodes of trembling and convulsions, but they didn't quite know what to make of them. To you, it looks like epilepsy. To them, it was the sacred disease. Sacred because it seemed otherworldly, a body hijacked by invisible forces, jerking and spasming without permission. Lying there in the abaton, you picture the scene: a man writhing suddenly on the stone floor, foam at his lips, attendants rushing to restrain his limbs. And instead of seeing nerves misfiring, everyone whispers, "The gods are speaking through him." It wasn't always seen as a blessing. Some feared these seizures were a mark of divine anger, an evil spirit shaking the body like a child rattling a toy. Others thought it was prophecy, the god Apollo pouring visions too powerful for the body to contain. Imagine being the poor patient. One day you're collapsing in the marketplace, the next you're either a prophet or a cursed soul, depending on who's watching. That's the kind of reputation you can't really control. Cures were equally theatrical. One prescription involved wearing amulets carved with protective words, letters scrambled in patterns thought to confuse the demon inside you. Another recommended the blood of a freshly slaughtered rooster, sipped in secret before sunrise. If you gagged at the thought, well, that was part of the cure. Some healers suggested burying objects touched during a seizure, believing the illness clung to material things. So if you happened to collapse on your friend's sandals, sorry, those were destined for the bonfire. And then there were smells. Strong, acrid scents, burned hair, sulfur, even onions roasted until black, were waved under the nose of a convulsing patient, the idea being that the foulness would chase away the spirit. You can almost see the logic. Nothing makes a person want to leave faster than someone setting onions on fire beside their face. Hippocrates, ever the rebel, wrote that this sacred disease was no holier than a runny nose. He argued that it came from natural causes, particularly problems in the brain and excess phlegm. Radical stuff at the time. While priests muttered about gods, he scribbled notes about humors and anatomy. Historians still debate how widely his view was accepted, but his words are a rare crack in the wall of divine explanation, a reminder that even in an age of myth, some minds searched for earthly answers. But for the average pilgrim, seizures were terrifying. Imagine lying in the abaton, half asleep, when the person next to you suddenly stiffens, jerks, and collapses in the straw. You'd jump back, heart racing, uncertain whether you were witnessing divine punishment or the gods choosing someone else to deliver a message. Either way, you'd want to be a few feet farther away. The rituals didn't just aim to cure, they aimed to protect the community. Someone with frequent convulsions might be kept away from certain rites, or asked to purify themselves before joining public gatherings. Fear clung to them, and yet fascination too. Were they dangerous? Blessed? Or both? The uncertainty gave rise to stories. Some said children touched by the disease grew up gifted with visions, others that they were doomed to short lives. You lie there, listening to the faint rustling of straw as another patient stirs, perhaps trembling in his sleep. The priests glide quietly between the mats, eyes sharp, ready to interpret every twitch as a message from above. The torches flicker, shadows lurching across the walls like restless spirits. And you can't help but think how thin the line is between fear and reverence, between sickness and prophecy. Modern minds might scoff, but are we so different? People still look for patterns in illness, still wonder if suffering carries hidden meaning. A seizure in a temple becomes a sign of gods. A seizure today might spark speculation about mystical visions. Maybe the body, in its strangeness, always tempts us to weave stories. The chanting grows softer, the temple air heavier. You curl slightly on your straw bed, and the thought lingers. Sometimes what terrifies us most is not the sickness itself, but the possibility that it speaks a language we'll never fully understand. The torchlight dances faintly against the carved stone walls, and your gaze drifts to a pilgrim nearby. His skin looks mottled, strange patches creeping across his arms and neck. You shift uneasily. In ancient Greece, skin wasn't just skin, it was a canvas where the gods could write their displeasure. Blotches, rashes, boils, these weren't merely medical annoyances. They were visible proof that something deeper, spiritual, had gone wrong. Your neighbors didn't whisper, infection, they muttered, curse. The Greeks believed the skin mirrored the soul. If your spirit was impure, your body might erupt in angry marks. A rash wasn't simply irritation, it was evidence that you defended cosmic order. Imagine explaining acne that way. Sorry, Apollo must be mad I didn't play the lyre today. You'd never run out of excuses for pimples. And yet people truly trembled when blemishes appeared, fearing the gods had branded them like cattle. Cures for these haunted skins often involved smoke. Priests waved censers of fragrant herbs, myrrh, frankincense, laurel leaves, around the afflicted, cloaking them in a haze meant to cleanse the invisible stain. You breathe in, and it's easy to imagine the ritual soothing the mind even as it stung the eyes. Some healers prescribed rubbing ashes mixed with oil into the lesions, the gray smears turning sufferers into ghostly figures. Others favored poultices of garlic and pig fat, spread thick and pungent, a recipe that could repel both spirits and casual conversation. The stranger remedies read like something from a nightmare. One text advises wrapping the patient in the skin of a freshly flayed animal, the warmth thought to draw out corruption. Another suggests bathing in a mixture of vinegar and seawater, leaving the skin stinging but purified. You picture someone stumbling out of such a bath, red as a boiled lobster, priests nodding in approval. Hippocrates, of course, tried to bring order to the chaos. He catalogued skin diseases with clinical detail, noting their appearance, duration, and progression. Some he blamed on diet, too much rich food, not enough balance. Others he linked to environment, swamps, marshes, damp houses. Still, even he couldn't fully pry skin free from stigma. The visible nature of these conditions made them frightening, a public display of private failure. Communities often treated sufferers as polluted. Certain rashes barred you from festivals or temples until purification was performed. People avoided touching, fearing contagion of both body and spirit. And yet, paradoxically, some saw the marks as holy signs, proof that the gods had chosen you for special attention. That tension lingers, even now, in how we react to visible illness, compassion tangled with fear, fascination mixed with unease. You lie back, imagining the smoke curling around you, prickling your nose, seeping into your clothes. Someone nearby groans softly, scratching at their arm until the skin breaks. The priests glide past, murmuring incantations, shaking censers that trail embers like fireflies. The air grows thick, hazy, almost suffocating. Your eyes water, and you wonder if that, too, is part of the ritual, blurred sight forcing you to surrender to sensation. And beneath it all lies a question historians still debate. Were these treatments symbolic theater, or did they carry real medicinal value? Many of those herbs do have antimicrobial properties. Smoke drives away insects. Vinegar cleans wounds. Perhaps faith and practicality dance together here, indistinguishable in the haze. You shift against the straw, the faint itch of your blanket making you think, what if your own skin flared up here, red and angry? Would you trust the smoke, the ashes, the whispers of priests? Or would you, like the Greeks, see the rash not as random but as a message? The thought lingers as the torches dim, and the smoke swirls upward, vanishing into the darkness above. Your stomach growls faintly as you lie there, though maybe it's just sympathy for the poor souls around you. Because if there's one obsession that creeps through Greek medical writings, it's digestion. The ancients were endlessly fascinated by the gut, what went in, what came out, and what went horribly wrong in between. They didn't just see the stomach as an organ. They saw it as a cauldron, a bubbling pot where health was cooked, or spoiled. For the Greeks, An unsettled belly could mean almost anything. Sharp cramps? Maybe you offended Demeter. Endless hiccups? Perhaps Dionysus, god of wine, was toying with you. Flatulence? Well, that was either an imbalance of humors or, as one comic playwright suggested, proof that Zeus had a wicked sense of humor. You chuckle softly in the dark, because even in ancient texts, doctors grumbled about patients embarrassed to describe their symptoms. Imagine a solemn priest recording in a scroll. Patient reports, noises. The cures were a cocktail of strange and sticky. Honey was the star ingredient, prized for its sweetness and supposed purifying power. Physicians prescribed mixtures of honey with olive oil to lubricate the gut, or honey with vinegar to cut through blockages. If that didn't work, they added powdered ash, yes, literal ash, because someone decided your stomach might just need a sprinkle of burnt offerings. Picture gagging your way through a spoonful of honey, oil, and ashes, and you know exactly why patients clutched their bellies. For stubborn cases, there were enemas, made from a mixture of wine, seawater, and herbs. You wince just imagining it. Others favored chewing on bitter plants like wormwood, the taste so awful it was assumed to chase away sickness. If your belly still roared in protest, priests might declare your condition divine punishment. The cure then? Fasting. Days without food to reset the body and prove your devotion. Conveniently, it also gave healers fewer messy symptoms to deal with. Hippocrates again tried to sort sense from superstition. He noted patterns: diarrhea after bad food, constipation after too much bread, bloating in those who drank swampy water. He wrote of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, sloshing like liquids in the stomach, and how imbalance caused disease. To you, it sounds almost modern: diet influences health. But to them, it was a grand philosophy of inner weather, with storms of bile and droughts of blood. Still, the rituals clung tight. Patients carried little clay models of stomachs to temples, setting them on altars in hopes of relief. Priests burned herbs that supposedly cooled the bowels. Some patients were asked to walk barefoot in circles until they felt lightheaded, as if dizziness might shuffle their humors back into place. One bizarre note even records a cure involving swallowing small stones to weigh down an unruly stomach. You groan softly at the thought, certain that indigestion plus gravel is not a winning combination. And yet, some remedies had surprising merit. Honey is antibacterial. Olive oil soothes inflammation. Vinegar can fight microbes. Even fasting can give the body a chance to reset. Historians argue whether the Greeks stumbled into useful treatments by accident, or whether centuries of trial and error hid kernels of truth inside layers of ritual. The debate lingers like the aftertaste of vinegar on honey. You turn slightly, pressing your own stomach against the straw, listening to the faint groans and sighs of the sleepers around you. In this temple, the gut wasn't just biology, it was morality, spirituality, destiny. A stomachache wasn't just a stomachache. It was a sign you were out of balance with the world itself. And you wonder, as your eyelids droop, maybe that's why people kept coming. Not just for a cure, but for reassurance that their suffering meant something, that their pain had a story to tell. The incense thickens, and you breathe slowly, tasting faint bitterness on the air. Somewhere nearby, a patient whispers a hymn, voice quivering between faith and discomfort. And you drift, stomach twisting just slightly, as though your own body is joining the chorus of ailments etched into history. The night presses in with a new kind of unease, a draft curling across the stone floor and tugging at your blanket of straw. You shiver, not from illness, but from the thought that the Greeks once believed such breezes were more than mere air. They were animakakoi, bad winds, capable of carrying disease straight into your lungs. A gentle gust might feel refreshing to you, but to them, it could be the kiss of sickness. Imagine stepping outside on a windy day, and everyone gasping in horror. Don't breathe too deep, you'll catch the west wind. The ancients mapped illnesses to directions. The dry north wind might chill your bones. The damp west wind? That one was infamous, blamed for spreading pestilence across valleys. Entire towns braced themselves against seasonal breezes, shutting windows, huddling indoors, and muttering prayers whenever the gusts turned strange. To you, it sounds like blaming allergies on the compass, but back then, the logic felt airtight. The invisible air had power, and no one could control its course. Protective rituals sprang up everywhere. People covered their mouths with cloths dipped in vinegar or wine, hoping the sharp scent would purify the air they inhaled. Some carried bundles of burning herbs, letting smoke curl around their heads like helmets against unseen foes. Others buried charms at crossroads, small figurines or etched stones meant to trap wandering winds before they reached the town. If you're picturing a village filled with smoky scarves and hidden trinkets, you're not far off. The temples added their own theater. Priests would chant hymns to Aeolus, keeper of the winds, begging him to seal up the noxious breezes in his mythical bag. During outbreaks, communities processed through streets, swinging censers, filling the air with a haze so thick it looked like fog rolling in. And beneath that smoke lay fear, the raw terror of breathing something invisible, something that slipped past every defense. Physicians tried to reason with it. Hippocrates, ever the observer, wrote that certain winds carried fevers because they stirred up marsh vapors. To him, the west wind wasn't cursed, it was contaminated. He linked geography and climate to health, noting that people near swamps were more prone to illness than those in dry, airy places. Modern scholars nod at this. Malaria thrives in stagnant waters, but the Greeks wrapped such insights in myth. A wind could be both science and spirit, a breeze both natural and divine. To live in that world meant constant vigilance. Imagine walking through the agora, a gust tossing your hair, and suddenly you pull your cloak tight, muttering under your breath, as if the air itself were a predator stalking you. Children were told not to play bareheaded when certain winds blew. Farmers delayed planting, fearing crops would sicken. Sailors sometimes refused to launch their ships, convinced that an ill wind would not only sink them but also rot their lungs. You shift on your straw mat, feeling the faint draft lick at your ankles. The temple attendants have hung cloth across the doorway, soaked in pungent oils. The scent clings to your nose, sharp and acrid, but oddly reassuring. Someone nearby murmurs a prayer, another coughs sharply, and you wonder if the fear of air itself made people sicker, breathing shallowly, tense with dread, until illness found its chance. Historians still debate this, whether bad winds were early recognition of airborne disease, or simply superstition clinging to every gust. And here's the irony, even now, the idea lingers. You've heard people talk about catching cold from a draft, or insist that sleeping under a fan makes them ill. The Greek fear of winds hasn't fully vanished, it just wears modern clothes. Maybe deep down, we still shiver at the thought that something invisible, tasteless, and weightless can undo us. The breeze stirs again, the torchlight flickering as if in warning. You pull the blanket tighter, listening to the smoke crackle and hiss as herbs burn in the corners. The night whispers through the hall, unseen but heavy, and you close your eyes, wondering if the gods themselves are sighing against your skin. You blink against the dim light, and suddenly you're aware of how precious sight must have felt in a world without spectacles, lenses, or corrective surgery. The Greeks wrote anxiously about the eyes, those delicate orbs that could fail in so many mysterious ways. You imagine a pilgrim fumbling in the Abaton, stumbling over straw mats because his vision has gone cloudy, begging priests for help. To us, it sounds like cataracts, infections, maybe temporary blindness from harsh sun. To them, it was often divine interference, Apollo's arrows of light striking too sharply, or Nemesis dimming the eyes of the arrogant. Ancient texts describe eyes that watered constantly, lids swollen shut, pupils clouded with strange films. Some sufferers saw double, others saw nothing but haze. One chilling note even tells of sudden nightfall at midday, what we'd call a stroke, but which they believed was the gods flicking a switch. To lose sight meant more than disability, it was exile from the visible world, a slow fading into shadows. And fear turned every blurred moment into a sign of fate. The cures were a mix of comfort and comedy. One remedy called for dripping warm milk directly into the eyes. Imagine lying still as someone squeezes goat's milk across your lashes, the liquid stinging and sticky, the healer nodding sagely as if this were the pinnacle of medicine. Others swore by tree sap, sticky drops from figs or pines, believed to harden weak eyes. The patient would blink furiously, half blinded by goo, and yet trust the process. If nothing else, it made you cry, which they thought washed away impurities. There were ointments too, mixtures of honey, copper salts, and wine, spread across inflamed lids. Honey again, the miracle cure of antiquity, praised for soothing and disinfecting. But copper salts? That was essentially sprinkling metal on your eyeball. Some physicians insisted the sting meant it was working. You weren't just imagining it, eyes watering in sympathy. Priests, of course, added ritual. A patient might be led outside at dawn, told to face the rising sun and recite hymns while sprinkling water on their face. The idea was to invite Apollo's healing light to replace the darkness. Others were instructed to sleep with a charm carved in the shape of an eye beneath their pillow, so that Asclepius could see their trouble in dreams. And if you woke the next morning with vision unchanged? Well, perhaps you hadn't prayed hard enough. Historians still argue about these practices. Were they primitive stabs at real ophthalmology, or pure superstition? Some remedies had merit. Honey, for instance, really does help with eye infections. Others, like sap and copper, likely made things worse. But here's the paradox. Even the worst treatment gave patients a sense of being cared for, of not being abandoned to the dark. And sometimes, that hope was as healing as any medicine. You close your own eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that thought. The hall around you grows quieter. Somewhere, a man rubs his temples, muttering about shadows in his vision. Another groans softly, a priest fanning incense near his face. You imagine what it would feel like to watch your world blur and fade, each torchlight smearing into a smear of orange. To cling to the hope that sap, honey, or the whisper of a god could restore it. And as your breathing slows, you realize how fragile the gift of sight must have seemed in a place where a single infection could snuff it out forever. The flickering lamps glow faintly against your eyelids, and you murmur to yourself, "Don't take the light for granted." The temple grows so still you can almost hear your own heartbeat, yet faintly, beneath the hush, another sound intrudes. A high, insistent hum, like a mosquito that refuses to leave your ear. You tilt your head, rub at the side of your face, but the sound lingers. And suddenly you understand why the Greeks wrote anxiously about mysterious noises in the ears. Ringing, buzzing, phantom music that no one else could hear. In their world, silence was rare. Streets rang with markets, homes buzzed with chatter, and temples hummed with ritual. So when someone complained of inner sounds, it felt uncanny, like the body inventing noise where there should be none. They called it Bowie, roaring, or Sophos, a buzzing. Some described it as flute-like, others like distant thunder. And with no way to explain nerves or auditory pathways, it was often chalked up to spirits lingering in the skull. Imagine living with tinnitus and being told, "Don't worry, that's just a small god drumming inside your head." Comforting, in a very unhelpful way. The cures, as usual, mixed the practical and the peculiar. One prescription recommended dripping warm olive oil into the ear canal, then stopping it with wool soaked in wine. You picture the patient tilting sideways, oil dribbling down their neck, a priest nodding with confidence. Others favored garlic juice, sharp and stinging, dripped carefully into the ear while murmuring invocations. And if liquid remedies failed, there were the charms, bronze discs engraved with spirals, hung from the ear as if spiraling metal could pull the sound outward. And then music. The Greeks believed harmony itself could soothe the restless body. Physicians advised patients to listen to flutes, lyres, even soft singing, not for entertainment but as therapy. You imagine lying here in the abaton while an attendant plucks a lyre gently nearby, the notes rising like smoke through the hall. For some, perhaps, the ringing receded beneath melody. For others, maybe it was just masked for a while, a lull in the endless hum. Either way, the act of listening gave the mind somewhere else to rest. Hippocrates himself mentioned ringing ears, puzzling over its causes. He suspected winds trapped inside the head, tiny drafts rattling against hidden chambers. It sounds absurd now, but you can almost see how he got there. Ears do echo, after all, like seashells. He advised patients to balance their diets, to purge excess phlegm, to keep their heads clear. Historians still debate how much he helped, but his notes stand as some of the earliest attempts to describe tinnitus in clinical terms. Meanwhile, the priests treated it as a divine whisper. Some claimed the noises were messages from the gods, Apollo, patron of music, tapping rhythm into your skull. If you paid attention, maybe the sounds would guide you. Others warned the opposite. The hum was a punishment, proof you had ignored divine songs. You smile wryly at the thought, wondering how many sleepless nights were spent straining to decode buzzing ears into holy Morse code. You shift on your mat, tilting your head as though trying to shake out the phantom ringing yourself. The hall is quiet but for the faint crackle of torches, yet the imagined noise feels real, pressing in from nowhere. Around you, patients murmur softly, some humming to themselves, perhaps as much for comfort as for prayer. And you realize how universal this experience is, ancient or modern. The frustration of hearing a sound no one else can hear is timeless. The music, faint and soothing, drifts from a corner where a priest plucks a slow tune. The notes wrap around you like a blanket, softening the phantom hum until it fades into the background. And you exhale, finally at ease, lulled by the strange thought that sometimes the best cure for noise is simply a gentler noise layered on top. The torches sputter faintly, sending threads of smoke curling toward the ceiling, and the chill of the stone floor begins to seep into your bones. You pull your blanket tighter, but the thought lingers, what if that cold never left? The Greeks knew this kind of illness well, bodies that seemed unable to stay warm, hands and feet like blocks of marble, skin pale and waxy. They called it a kind of psychosis, a chill of the flesh that frightened them almost as much as fevers did. Where fever burned like divine wrath, this cold felt like divine abandonment, as if the warmth of life itself was slipping away. Descriptions survive in their texts, patients whose extremities never warmed, who shivered even in the heat of summer. Some were said to have lips tinged blue, breath faint, movements sluggish. To us, it sounds like circulation problems, thyroid disorders, maybe hypothermia. To them, it was as if the body's fire had been stolen. One physician wrote that these sufferers carry winter within them. You shudder at the phrase, picturing someone wrapped in wool while others around them sweat under the sun. The cures leaned heavily on heat and ritual. Blankets of animal fur were piled over patients, sometimes so thick they could barely move. Fires roared in temple hearths, attendants pressing warm stones against arms and legs. Wine played its part, of course, heated, spiced, and forced down the throat to ignite the inner flame. The idea was to stoke the body like a hearth, feeding warmth until it spread again through cold veins. You imagine the patient swaying, half drunk and dizzy, but perhaps comforted by the flush of alcohol. Some remedies bordered on the theatrical. One text prescribes placing the patient in a freshly slaughtered animal carcass, letting the residual warmth seep into their limbs. It sounds grotesque, yet the Greeks treated it with solemnity, a desperate attempt to borrow life's heat. Others instructed patients to bathe in warm olive oil, their skin gleaming as attendants massaged the liquid in, believing it sealed warmth inside. And still others swore by wrapping the body in heated clay, letting the earth's fire soak into the flesh. Priests often framed the chill as a spiritual issue. Coldness was associated with neglecting Dionysus, god of warmth, revelry, and life. To grow cold was to grow distant from joy, and so rituals of song, wine, and dance were prescribed. You picture the scene, a frail patient coaxed to sway in the torchlight, attendants clapping softly, trying to trick the body into remembering what it meant to be alive. Whether it cured the cold or not, it certainly warmed the spirit. Hippocrates tried to pin it down in humoral terms. Too much phlegm, he said, smothered the body's natural heat. His advice: balance the diet, purge the excess, and stimulate circulation with vigorous rubbing. You picture an ancient massage session, no spa candles, just firm hands, rough cloths, and the occasional splash of heated wine. Did it work? Sometimes, perhaps. Or maybe the sheer act of attention kept people alive a little longer. Historians still debate what exactly these cold body cases were. Poor nutrition? Chronic illness? Early descriptions of anemia? The accounts leave just enough detail to spark endless argument. But what's clear is the fear they inspired. To feel icy in a sunlit land like Greece must have felt profoundly unnatural, a betrayal of the body by the very climate. You shift your own toes under the straw, half convinced they're colder than before. Around you, the temple air feels cooler, and you imagine attendants bustling to and fro with warmed cups of wine, pressing hot stones into frail hands. The hall glows faintly with firelight, yet the thought persists that some bodies carry winter no matter the season. And you wonder, was the cure truly the blankets and wine, or the reassurance that others would not let you freeze alone? The night wears on, and you shift slightly, pressing your temples with your fingertips. Even in this dim quiet, you can almost feel it, the dull, throbbing weight of a headache that refuses to let go. The Greeks knew this pain well, so well they gave it names. Cephalalgia for the general ache, heterocrania for the one-sided torment we'd call a migraine. Imagine lying in this temple, eyes squeezed shut, every torch flame too bright, every whisper too loud, and realizing your suffering has been written down for centuries. The descriptions are hauntingly familiar. Pain like hammer blows behind the eyes. Pulses that keep time with the heartbeat. Nausea curling in the stomach, making even the smell of incense unbearable. Some texts describe headaches lasting days, even weeks, breaking only to return again. To us, they read like migraine diaries. To the Greeks, they were punishments, arrows of Apollo, lashes of Nemesis, the gods pounding on skulls like war drums. Cures ranged from the logical to the laughable. One physician recommended resting in a darkened room, avoiding noise and light, something every migraine sufferer today still longs for. Another advised applying poultices of crushed herbs, mint and rosemary, their sharp scents thought to drive out pain. And then there were stranger tricks, tying a tight band around the head to squeeze the ache away, or holding a hot iron close to the skull so the rising steam would lift the pain upward. You imagine someone staggering around with their head practically steaming, priests nodding solemnly as if the gods approved. More invasive treatments existed too. In severe cases, doctors suggested bloodletting from the forehead or temples, letting pain flow out with the crimson drops. Others drilled small holes in the skull, a primitive trepanation, to release the pressure. You wince at the thought, picturing the patient gripping the stone bench while iron scrapes bone. Did it work? Occasionally, perhaps, if the pain was caused by swelling. But mostly, it was desperation etched into ritual. Priests, as always, layered meaning over medicine. Headaches weren't random. They were proof of arrogance, of ignoring divine order. Patients were told to confess pride, to humble themselves, to offer sacrifices. One ritual even required the sufferer to place their head against a statue of Apollo, as if pressing the pain directly into marble would appease him. It's almost funny to imagine a line of groaning patients queued up to bonk their heads against stone in unison. Almost. And yet, behind the oddity, you sense something familiar, the desperate search for relief, the willingness to try anything when pain becomes unbearable. Historians still debate whether some Greek remedies accidentally worked. Herbs like willow bark contained real pain-relieving compounds. Darkness and quiet undeniably helped. Even the pressure of a tight band might have offered brief distraction. But then there's the roasted onion strapped to the forehead, the charms engraved with spirals, hope dressed in strange costumes. You lie back, the straw crackling beneath your head, and imagine that pounding ache throbbing with each heartbeat. The torchlight flickers too sharply, the whispers of sleepers echo like shouts. In that moment, you feel the solidarity of history, thousands of years, millions of heads, all pulsing with the same cruel rhythm. And whether in a marble temple or a modern bedroom with blackout curtains, the wish is always the same: please, just let it stop. The chanting softens, the torches dim, but the ache lingers, stubborn as ever. You exhale slowly, willing the pressure to ebb, and you realize something strange. In every age, pain makes believers of us all. Believers in medicine, in ritual, in gods, in anything that might promise release. And as the night hums gently around you, you let the thought drift like smoke. Maybe faith itself, in any form, was always the most powerful painkiller. The night has stretched into its deepest hours, and still your eyes remain open. You roll onto one side, then the other, the straw rustling loudly in your ears. Sleep hovers just beyond reach, mocking you with its distance. And in that moment you realize, you've slipped into the same affliction that plagued the Greeks, the torment of endless wakefulness. Insomnia was no less maddening then than it is now, and the texts echo with frustration over nights that refuse to yield to rest. Descriptions of these sleepless sufferers sound achingly familiar. They lay tossing, their minds buzzing with thoughts that refuse to quiet. Some complained of a burning behind the eyes, others of limbs too restless to stay still. One account even describes a man who counted the flickering shadows on the wall to pass the time, an ancient version of counting sheep, except his sheep were torch flames. You smile faintly, recognizing the shared misery of every sleepless age. The remedies? A cocktail of strange comforts and desperate measures. One prescription suggested sipping warm milk mixed with honey before bed, something soothing and sweet to calm the spirit. That one doesn't sound too bad. But another recommended smearing the soles of the feet with poppy juice, hoping the opiate properties would sink through the skin and lull the body. You imagine sticky, dark stains on your feet, priests insisting drowsiness would follow. Others advised rubbing oil into the scalp while chanting hymns, the rhythmic massage as much about distraction as medicine. Then came the rituals. Insomnia was often framed as spiritual restlessness. Perhaps you'd angered Hypnos, the god of sleep, or his brother Thanatos, god of death, was hovering too close. Priests prescribed purifications, bathing in cool water, lighting lamps scented with lavender or myrtle, singing lullabies not for children but for yourself. Entire households sometimes joined in, family members reciting soft prayers beside the bed, their voices weaving a cocoon of calm. You picture it like an ancient ASMR session, gentle murmurs, flickering firelight, the hum of crickets outside. And for those truly desperate? Odd tricks appear in the texts. One healer swore by staring at a spinning wheel until the eyes grew heavy. Another advised burning an onion and inhaling the smoke, which seems more likely to make you weep than sleep. Yet another suggested lying beside a gently crackling fire, counting sparks as they rose, a practice so soothing that you can almost feel your own eyelids droop just imagining it. Historians still debate whether these practices actually helped or were just elaborate distractions. Milk and honey had real calming effects. Poppy juice contained opiates, albeit in unpredictable doses. Lavender soothed the senses. And counting shadows or sparks? A primitive cognitive trick to bore the restless mind into submission. The line between superstition and psychology blurs until it's hard to tell the difference. You lie still on your mat, imagining the priests drifting quietly through the hall, their robes whispering against the stone. Somewhere, a patient hums softly to themselves, a lullaby more for comfort than melody. The torches are nearly gone now, leaving the abaton in semi-darkness. You hear the sigh of someone finally surrendering to sleep, and envy fills you. Because even in this place of divine dreams, some still lie awake, listening to their own pulse drum in their ears. You close your eyes and picture the sparks of an ancient hearth, rising one by one, each glowing ember a sheep leaping over some invisible fence. And slowly your breath steadies. You realize the Greeks weren't so wrong. Sometimes sleep isn't captured, it's coaxed, gently courted with rituals, scents, and repetition until at last it takes pity and arrives. You roll onto your back, eyes tracing the faint outlines of the ceiling beams above, and you think about another kind of sickness, one that wasn't always measured in fevers or rashes. The Greeks sometimes spoke of an ailment peculiar to scholars, philosophers, and those who lived too long in their own thoughts. Call it mental fatigue, call it melancholia, or as one writer put it, a sickness of the mind caused by too much knowing. You imagine an ancient intellectual hunched over scrolls by lamplight, eyes bloodshot, muttering theories about the stars until his head feels heavier than Atlas holding the sky. The symptoms, as described, would sound familiar to anyone who's burned out on work: constant exhaustion, low appetite, headaches, irritability, a sense of life's joy drained away. Some complained of hearing phantom voices debating with them. Others grew so wrapped in thought they forgot to eat or bathe. It was seen not as laziness, but as a dangerous byproduct of learning itself. Too much knowledge, they feared, could unravel the body. You smile faintly at the irony, an illness of intelligence in a culture that idolized wisdom. The cures were as poetic as they were practical. Physicians urged scholars to leave their libraries and go to the sea. Salt air, they claimed, refreshed the mind. Long walks along the shore, watching waves crash and recede, would cleanse the mental clutter. Some patients were prescribed daily recitations of poetry, not for study but for delight, letting rhythm and rhyme reset the inner harmony. Imagine your doctor today writing on a prescription pad, 2 sonnets and a beach stroll, taken daily. Others prescribed music. Gentle lyre melodies were said to soothe an overstimulated mind, while flutes calmed restless spirits. Communal meals, laughter, even mild intoxication with wine were recommended, to remind the scholar that life existed outside the labyrinth of thought. Priests framed it differently. The gods demanded balance. Too much devotion to books and not enough to festivals was an insult to Dionysus, patron of joy. The treatment, then, was ritual, dancing, singing, feasting, anything that tethered the mind back to the body. Hippocrates and his followers tried to pin this ailment on humors, particularly an excess of black bile, which they linked to melancholy. They prescribed purging and diet changes, foods thought to lighten the system. Lentils and figs were recommended, while heavy meats were discouraged. Still, even they conceded that a change of scenery, a plunge into seawater, or a day of poetry had remarkable effects. Historians debate whether this was truly illness or just early recognition of burnout and depression, but the descriptions ring all too familiar. You picture yourself as one of those weary scholars, dragging your feet to the temple, head aching from thought rather than fever. The priests greet you not with smoke or ash, but with laughter, urging you to eat, to sing, to walk beneath the sun. And for a moment you sense the wisdom buried in ritual, that sometimes healing means stepping away from seriousness, letting joy stitch the mind back together. Around you in the Abaton, the coughs and groans of the sick blend with softer murmurs, someone reciting a scrap of verse, another humming a tune. Even here, among fevers and rashes, the Greeks understood that the mind itself could falter, and that healing it meant more than herbs or prayers. It meant remembering life's sweetness. You close your eyes, hearing in your imagination the surf of a distant sea, the splash of waves against rocks, the laughter of companions sharing wine at dusk. And for the first time tonight, your body feels light, your mind unburdened. Perhaps the best cure isn't a potion or a prayer, but a reminder that joy itself can be medicine. The Abaton grows quieter still, the last embers of the torches fading into a dim, orange glow. Around you, the restless movements of the sick have softened, even the coughs and sighs have dwindled to occasional murmurs. It feels as though the whole temple has drawn a deep breath, settling at last into calm. And in that silence you find yourself reflecting, not just on the ailments you've witnessed here, but on the strange, tender humanity woven through them all. You've seen fevers mistaken for spirits, trembling bodies elevated into divine prophecy, rashes branded as curses, and headaches treated as arrows of wrath. You've smelled the smoke of herbs, felt the imagined sting of copper and vinegar in the eyes, tasted the bitter mixture of honey and ash in your mind's mouth. Some cures felt absurd, others cruel, yet hidden among them were small sparks of sense, herbs that healed, rituals that soothed, comforts that mattered. The Greeks lived in a world where medicine and myth refused to part ways, and perhaps that blending was not a weakness, but a survival. Historians still debate, endlessly, about what these practices meant. Were they primitive fumblings towards science, or simply superstition disguised as care? But as you lie there, in this temple made of stone and shadow, you feel the question loosen. Maybe it doesn't matter so much whether a treatment was true. Maybe the real power lay in the ritual itself, in the way people were gathered, touched, listened to, believed. Healing, after all, has always been part biology, part faith. The night stretches long, and you think of how little has changed. People still swallow strange tonics, wear charms, whisper prayers, seek music and silence to quiet their pain. They still search for meaning in their sickness, still wonder if suffering carries a hidden message. The Greeks, for all their strangeness, weren't so far from you. Their fears, their hopes, their longing to be comforted through the dark, all of it feels familiar, almost achingly so. The air cools, the incense thins. The priests have withdrawn, their chants now only echoes in memory. The serpents that once stirred across the floor have coiled themselves into hidden corners, silent guardians in the shadows. And you, lying still, feel the night cradle you as gently as any cure could. Your breath slows. Images blur, temples, flames, waves of the sea where scholars once sought healing. You let them drift together, their edges softening, like watercolor bleeding across parchment. Even the harsher memories, the taste of seawater, the sting of smoke, begin to fade, replaced by the warmth of blankets, the hum of distant wind, the rhythm of your own heartbeat. It is here, in this soft dimness, that you understand why the Greeks trusted their gods of healing so fiercely. Not because the cures always worked, but because they gave shape to fear. They turned chaos into ritual, pain into stories, and suffering into something you could endure with dignity. And that, perhaps, was the truest medicine of all. So now, as you sink deeper into this quiet, let the images dissolve. Let the torchlight dim into embers, the smoke thin into night air, the groans and murmurs fade into silence. Picture yourself beneath a sky littered with stars, each one a small beacon watching over you. There is no fever here, no trembling, no restless hum in the ears. Only stillness, cool and soft, like the hand of Hypnos himself brushing across your brow. And if, by chance, you dream tonight, may it be not of curses or gods demanding offerings, but of gentle seas, warm breezes, and laughter carrying across a banquet table. May you feel the same reassurance the pilgrims sought in marble halls long ago, that you are seen, that you are tended, that rest will come. Now breathe slowly, letting each inhale grow lighter, each exhale melt into the dark. The stone floor beneath you softens into cloud, the air hums with silence, and the world grows dim. You are drifting, safe, untethered, carried away on currents of sleep that need no priest, no offering, no cure. End of script. Sweet dreams.